And we are live with our 201st episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. Super excited to be here as always. Got to say hi to Ken's dogs as usual, right? As Ken and I were talking earlier, like before pre-show, we've decided this week's episode is brought to you by, what was it, anxiety and existential dread, right? I
Dread,
guess
yeah.
Ken, dread, something like that. Or on the flip side, it's also brought to you by Redpoint Security. So if you need code security, yeah, check out Redpoint. That was kind of odd though. Like we dropped viewers really quick there for some reason, but I don't know what's going on. Maybe whatever. The link to YouTube, we'll see what's going on there. This week, as our 201st episode, there's a few items that we did want to bring up. First of all, KernelCon. The training at KernelCon is available. There's probably not going to be a less expensive or better option this year to actually take practical secure code review. So let me drop that into the links again. If you've been waiting for an opportunity, this one will be great. There's going to be others. Like we are definitely going to be at DEF CON again, training after the conference like we did with last year. The DEF CON trainings, that'll be available there. They're doing those ones in Bellevue later this year as well, and maybe even Singapore. And there's been some discussion of taking it on the road again back down to Australia. So and of course, other opportunities may pop up, but this is the first. This is the only one that we currently have outside of the DEF CON training that's currently on the books and live. So if you're thinking about taking practical secure code review, this is the place to do it. Ken and I have updated the course for 2023. Just given the last couple of years of what we have seen, so it'd be a good chance to jump in there. Outside of that, Ken, are there any other places or anything else that you want to promote this week?
No, I do want to. Well, yeah, actually, I do. So, but
Okay.
real quick, can you take a look in Slack? It sounds like our video has restricted access. Our YouTube live link says restricted access, according to Larry. So yeah, just let me know what you find there So for me though, I was going to mention that this Friday I'll be at Front Runners JS conference in Arlington, Virginia. So if you're going to be there, I doubt that someone listening to this is going to be there, but if you are, please hit me up, DM on Slack. You can get to our Slack via our website, absoluteappsec.com, or DM me on Twitter at CKTricky. But yeah, I'd love to. There's actually somebody who I'm going to meet up there who I work with at GitHub, and she is keynoting. So I was going to say hi. But besides that, I don't know who else is going to be there. So anyways, if you're going to be there, Front Runners JS in Arlington, Virginia, this Friday, I'll be there. I think you and I, Seth, we've got quite a schedule lining up for the next half of a year of training. Also, I got more messages about our training course being hosted online. So here's what I'll say. Right now, the pre-recorded material is not available. However, we do virtual training we've done it for conferences and we've done it for corporate organizations as well. So that's what I can say about the online side of things. So if you're one of those people that had that question, consider it answered. Besides that, Seth, nothing else that I can think of right this moment.
Okay. Yeah. I will be in Northern Virginia later this month.
When I'm gone.
When Ken is gone, of course, right? But I will be speaking at OWASP Nova on the 23rd. It's going to be kind of like a old school versus modern talk, talking about vulnerabilities that I've seen over the years, how they manifest nowadays, what we've seen lately. So code snippets and other things, just kind of like an experiential and then like where I see it going discussion, right? So it should be interesting, especially if you've been at the podcast, you listen, come say hi, we'll go grab drinks or whatever after. I would love to, see people. It's the first time I'll be in Virginia in a long time, and of course Ken's going to be gone, right? That's always the case, inevitably.
I think I have pictures from, I want to say maybe 2019, where you were up here and we were out to dinner with you were hanging out with my family. But yeah, I think that was the last time you were here that I can remember.
Yeah, that was probably right. 2018, 2019. Yeah. Anyway, we tend to see each other in other places, right? So
yeah, we travel to conferences and such.
Exactly. So. Cool. Well, I don't see any I can't see any problems with the link, so I'm not sure why the restrictions there. If I look at YouTube Live, it doesn't say there's any restrictions.
Yeah, I couldn't find any. I couldn't replicate the behavior Larry was describing, so I think we're fine.
Okay. Cool. Well, let's dive into it. I know last week we had Jerry on. That was a great discussion on CVEs and what goes into all of that. Yeah, but this week, right, there was a few items I know we didn't get to last week. First thing was breaches and the number of breaches that have happened in the last, couple of weeks. I know you sent me a link on one. Of course, there's the LastPass one that's been kind of huge in the news, especially running around security circles because everybody is using password managers nowadays. So that one's a fairly significant breach that happened, at least in our circles. But what of those, like, what do you want to talk about? Like, which one piques your interest?
I mean, they all piqued my interest. I think actually what was more interesting when we talk. So there were two companies mentioned in the breach: LastPass and Chick-fil-A. And I was sharing the Chick-fil-A one with Mike McCabe because he and I both really like Chick-fil-A, and I always joke about it and all that stuff, right? Anyway, so I sent that to him, and he actually he offered me a counter link from, I think, 2018, where they talked about how Chick-fil-A actually uses GitOps and Kubernetes in its stores to manage and monitor and operate their IoT devices that are inside the store. So I'll post that link here. But I don't know, man. Like, I thought that was actually interesting that Chick-fil-A is like so ahead of technology-wise the curve. And I mean, obviously, you don't think of them as I don't think of them as a technology company. But it turns out, and here's the link. Turns out they're actually pretty dope when it comes to some of this stuff. So just posted that link there. Let me put it in our general Slack as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, they apparently each store has like its own GitHub repository, and they've set up the cluster such that the majority of stuff that never needs to leave is all just within the cluster, meaning doesn't need to leave the premises information wise in their own cluster. But then they also have specific stuff that is important to feed on to corporate, and so that's segmented such that the stuff in that, or the cluster can communicate only that information up. Yeah, it's pretty wild. You should definitely check out that. I mean, did you know that about Chick-fil-A? Like, I had no idea.
No, I mean, this, to be fair, right? Like, I'm not overly surprised, right? Like, based on where we're at and what's happened over the last couple of decades, every company that's out there lives and dies by the technology that runs the company, right? You start talking about competitive advantage. The reason why there is Walmart and not Kmart, right, is because of technology. Yeah, what else did we get in here?
Sorry, he just wrote, do they merge on Sundays? And I about lost it. That was awesome.
Probably not. Is that considered work? I don't know. Maybe they have never mind. I'm not going to go there. Yeah. But, most companies live and die by the technology that they implement. So if they found a model that works with, new tech and like is able to, push that out, it doesn't necessarily surprise me that much. Right. I know, like, that was one of the interesting things being involved with some of, like, if you've ever seen I'm sure most people have the Carvana vending machines, right? Those are all driven by some sort of tech. And I know it's like Linux underneath the hood and a bunch of automated scripts, and like how that actually is all put together, I'm sure is pretty fascinating from a technology perspective. But there's no reason why they wouldn't be using this modern tech to actually run that system. And that, that's going to go to all the franchise stores, everything else that's out there and available. So, but Kubernetes, GitOps, that's pretty awesome, right? Like, we've seen that in other places, but why not, right? It works.
Yeah, I mean, I make a lot of jokes about Kubernetes, and the reason I make those jokes is because people tend to, dive headfirst into it before it's even needed, and then that just requires an inordinate amount of work, and you got to manage those systems. Anyways, whatever. It's a lot of effort, and oftentimes it doesn't even make sense. This is actually the one time where it's like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. So I don't know if they're still doing it in that way, but I just thought that was. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Now, that's not how they were breached. We have to be clear. They were breached through actually their rewards app, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a
So,
credential
and
stuffing attack. So, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
yeah, this is one that I've always, I don't know, being in the security space, every time that you sign up for a new rewards, whatever, like put your phone number in and they want you to register online. Um, if you've ever really done at least even just a modicum of research into those rewards programs, you'll notice that that a lot of them are um, there's like a third party rewards provider that they use. Right? So I don't know if Chick-fil-A is this way because I haven't looked into their program, but especially a lot of the smaller companies that are out there, they'll sign up and they'll have someone else actually manage those rewards. And when you start to look at, any of the traffic that's flowing back and forth, even things like logging into those rewards programs through the website and that, how it's tied to the back end. There's a lot of indicators there that I have concerns with, or I've had concerns with in the past. So I've been rather reticent to sign up with, some of those just based on the tech and based on the stack that I'm seeing in the communication flows as they go back and forth. And I've always wondered, okay, when's it actually going to happen, right? When is somebody going to be compromised through that rewards program, or why isn't this targeted more? Because it is a way for a criminal or someone else to actually get free product, free food, right? Like transfer points away. That sort of an attack, or that sort of a reward seems to be fairly enticing, right? Like I would think that this is going to become more and more common. So I'm really interested to see, like, it says it's an automated attack, and I had, like, to be completely fair, you provided this article and I haven't necessarily read through it too much. Do you have any idea what actually happened and how it was exposed, or how they were compromised?
They just said it was credentials. Obviously, like not.
Credential stuffing
There's not. I don't know anybody doing 2FA on their on their
on
rewards
their
apps,
rewards.
right? So it was pretty much just like guess weak passwords, credential stuffing attack kind of deal.
Which is, I mean, again, this
Whatever,
is
you know
not
what I
super
mean?
surprising, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because if you think about consumer behavior, they know that their bank needs to have its own password. But guess what they're probably doing across all these different rewards accounts and this, oh, well, I don't really care about this, like, uh, you know, whatever account it is. So I'm going to use that same password that I've been using for the past 20 years, right? That's like, I think that's going to be normal human behavior because it's, oh, well, I don't really like, it's not overly sensitive here, right? Um,
Mhm.
and, I would be surprised even if like people in our space don't do the same thing, right? Because it's a throwaway account or they view it as a throwaway account. Um, and they're using passwords that are in like the Adobe breach or whatever breach that was out there, years ago. So doing some sort of credential stuffing against a rewards program, I mean, it's paid off, obviously.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I mean, so
interesting.
between December for the details, December 18th, right? Going back last year, but I say like last year was like a couple months ago. So December 18th, 2022 through February 12th, 2023, an attacker used credential stuffing or attackers to compromise approximately 71,473 accounts So we'll just say 71,000 accounts were compromised. And what they did to take action on that was they removed the funds that had been preloaded onto those people's accounts, obviously rotated credentials, and then removed payment information, which totally makes sense, right? You don't want someone logging into those accounts and then charging, whether it's your existing balance or taking it off of your payment that's associated with your payment info that's associated with your account. Totally makes sense what they did. They've been pretty open about it. Honestly, this is the downside of what it is. It's the downside of our current, and everybody talks about it. And we've been talking. It's so, how many times is this discussion about like passwords should be dead and they're just not a great way to manage credentials and all that stuff. Until that is actually resolved, there are other ways to manage it, of course, but it's just a symptom of this architecture that we've been using for so long, this username password stuff. And then the worst part about e-commerce is that you need to make things convenient enough for people for it to be reasonable. If I have to sign in every single time on my rewards app, I'm probably not going to use it. If I have to have two-factor enabled on it to use it, I'm probably not going to use it, right? If I have to, enter in a password that I'm never going to remember on granted, mobile devices, they've got password stores. It should make all this easy, but whatever, I'm probably not going to do it. And that's obviously there's a convenience factor / laziness factor that plays into all. It's the same reason, to be honest, even with me, like it's why I don't use the Nextdoor app, because I love the Nextdoor app, not because I write anything, because I love to watch the shit show content sometimes late at night when I'm just looking for entertainment. I like watching the crazy things people write. It's whatever. I'm a weirdo. That's how I roll. But guess what? Facebook's still number one. Why? Because Nextdoor, every time you click a link, you have to sign in again. And I don't want to do that. And I guarantee you nobody else wants to do that. And I'm a security guy. So anyways, it's just the downside nature of, if you want to make money, you kind of have to make things convenient. We have this architecture that's built and has existed for all of this time around username and password combos. What can Chick-fil-A do? Yeah, there's smarter ways to do things. There's more technology enabled on our phones and all of that to make all this easier and less reliant on credentials and blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, this stuff's still going to continue. And there has to be some massive changes or it's just going to keep happening.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's an interesting problem. And actually, part of my interest here is based on some mobile application testing that I did a number of years ago, right? For a fast food, at the business. They had a, gift card component to their app. And it was fairly easy, right? That was one of the things that, we found in the application, and I'm not going to drop names today, but that was one of the things that we identified, was this ability to actually insecure direct object reference, right? Like gift card numbers, you could see whether or not they were active, and then you could just monitor them, try and add them to your account. And as soon as somebody else would activate them and put money on them, you could use it and drain it and transfer it over to your own gift card, right? It was just this whole ability within the application to do these transfers, to do these still gift card balances. It was fairly interesting to see. And that was gift cards. It wasn't necessarily a rewards program, but the two are essentially the same when it comes down to it. And I think that's what you're seeing here as well, is they're talking about, hey, there's this account that you set up. It has a rewards balance on it, but there's also gift cards associated with that, right? Some of those items that screenshot actually shows is, oh, there's a gift card here with a $2,000 balance on it. You can just add that to your account and then use it, right? Or, you can use their account to make a purchase with that, which is, it's fascinating, right? How that actually happens. And I'm with you that it's the older tech. We're trying to make things convenient. But at some level, it does go to the consumer and how they actually protect what the passwords they actually use, if they've been trained in using a password manager. But that does lead us to this second breach that we're going to talk about here, right? LastPass. because how far do you actually trust those systems as well is very dependent, or the security that protects those passwords is then dependent on a third party and how they've implemented that security and the backups and everything else that goes into it. So I mean, it's not all, rainbows and unicorns. You still got to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I was reading, we can get into the next one, but the next breach, but I was for sure like with LastPass, but I was also looking at Brian Glass's, article he posted about the potential Verizon breach, but it's a little weird because the article is making it seem as if there was no breach of these. I don't know, was it 7 million records, something like that? That it's just the same 7 million records from a company that had access to Verizon, not to limited, that did business with Verizon and had limited access to details of the users of Verizon, but had been compromised at some point. They already knew about it. That leak continues to circulate, is how they're saying that this. Yeah. Anyways, they're just saying that this database of 7.5 million Verizon users is like an old thing. It's actually pretty inconsequential. It just keeps circulating back up and up and up again. But again, that's just what the article says. I'm not sure if that's true. Yeah. So, anyways, just wanted to briefly touch on that since Brian had posted in there, and yeah, it was worth covering.
Well, and I mean, he brings up another good point, like his last comment there. Like, and if you're not in Slack, you should be, right? If you're listening to the podcast, because obviously we're referencing it quite a bit today. But him talking about doing this for a large bookstore retailer, right, where it wouldn't let you brute force the pin, right? So if you had a fixed number and then you were trying to brute force like the 4-digit pin on that gift card number, it wouldn't allow you to do that. But the flip side of that, you could pick common pins and then just brute force the gift card number itself. And it wouldn't lock you out if you were trying to do that sort of an attempt. This is one of those flip sides, like the business logic flaws that you need to think about, right? You're testing an application, you're looking at the source code behind the scenes. Like, how does lockout actually occur? Like, we have this discussion all the time, at least internally with, me, Justin, the consultants over at Redpoint. Like, what does the lockout behavior look like? And does it actually prevent what they think it's preventing? Because at times you lock out accounts or you lock out, streams, and I mean, it all goes back to Crocs and socks and monitoring and actually seeing what's going on behind the scenes. But the behavior to an attacker and to a consumer needs to be consistent, right? What pieces of information they're trying to brute force, you've got to have some sort of a counter there. You've got to be able to identify what's going on, shut the system down, shut that user out. It's a non-trivial piece of access control or technology to put into place. It's not as easy as just like, oh, we'll just lock them out, right? But I mean,
when I was at GitHub, we had a whole team dedicated to just that, right? Abuse and spam kind of deal.
And honestly, that was some of my first experience with application security was people enrolling at the bank using PIN numbers and their account number to actually, or their like credit card number to start the enrollment process. And the bank didn't realize that, attackers are actually going to use that PIN number, or they're going to use that form of enrollment to enumerate PIN numbers for stolen credit card or stolen debit card numbers, right? And so they tried to do, okay, well, we're going to prevent this from happening. If you try more than 3 times, we're going to lock you out, or 5 times, we're going to lock out that PIN, or we're going to lock out that debit card number to prevent, anything else from happening. And what did the attackers do? They're like, okay, instead of, trying, 1,000 different numbers, we're going to take the 5 or the 4 most common PIN numbers and try those instead, because most people pick things like 1, 2, 3, 4 or 1, 3, 5, 7, whatever, like whatever those common numbers are. They went and just picked those 4 and ran through all of the compromised debit numbers using those 4 most common ones, right? So there's ways to think your way around it and find those edge cases and those flaws, which are super interesting. Yeah, fraud in general, fascinating. You're right.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. I mean, remember we had the client who was a e-commerce client up in, yeah, I can say this. We had an e-commerce client up in New York, and their site had coupons, and there was an elaborate couponing scheme that was only they were the only reason that e-commerce vendor was saved was because they had introduced a manual oversight step into the process at some point before the attack started. And if it weren't for that, they would have lost. And I mean, like, I don't remember the number, but it was a catastrophic amount of money from this couponing scheme. And when they described how it worked, I was like, man, can you explain that again? Like, that's a fairly complex fraud scheme. Anyways, and so that's why I'm like, man, loss prevention seems like a fascinating field to work in. Honestly, I'd love to hear the stories of somebody, and that's what we need to do. We need to find somebody in loss prevention and hear their stories. But because it never ceases to amaze me, like the things people come up with to scam people out of money.
Yeah. And I mean, if I go back to my days at the bank, right, that was one of the things that info security was starting to get more and more involved with, right? Building clusters of monitoring like daily transactions, monitoring like, what the website was actually, or what the online banking was doing, who was actually, performing what, and then running data analytics against it to identify fraud, because that was a huge, I mean, it amounts to huge losses, right? At a bank, at any like retailer, right? Being able to cut that down, even like percentages, small percentages, is massive to the bottom line of a business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's really an interesting field. There's so many ways people get. It's hard to think through all of those scenarios, but hey, that's where threat modeling and all that kind of stuff comes into play to help at least like in their case introduce steps where hey, just the manual oversight step that saved them from everything. So anyways, meaning you can't predict every scenario, but having like guardrails. Yeah, to your point.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, so what is your recommendation there then, right? Like, what do people? Yeah, I mean, I guess we kind of covered it already, but
Probably
what
move
is it
out
that
of the
you?
username password.
Yeah, if you're building a system.
Yeah, if you could move away from that and leverage some of the newer technologies out there, would be probably one of my main recommendations. But also, obviously, you can. So, if you're a good example would be banks typically they have a password, username and password still. They are different though, because they also have two-factor auth, but they do give you the option of doing like a touch ID, or excuse me, a face ID through the mobile app, right? So there's like, obviously every business is different, but there are like little things you can do to, like, hey, maybe people don't love using a strong password every time they log in. Cool, that's fine. Just use face ID. Like, set that one time password to be strong, but then you don't actually have to enter it every time. There's like design balances you can make and trade-offs you can make, but just saying, hey, security's hard, let me or maybe don't. Maybe none of this matters. Maybe it was a blip on the radar of Chick-fil-A and it's just not even worth addressing. I don't know. But
Yeah,
from my perspective, I think we should address it.
more chicken, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I mean that's what it comes down to, is like those of us that have that like the expertise, or I wouldn't even say expertise, but just experience using something like a password manager, need to teach others who maybe aren't as technical how those actually work and what the proper way to use them is. And even as simple as like, oh, it's the kids or whoever else that you have in your life that's using those passwords, those shared resources, rather than giving them out in such a simple way, or making the password simple, like figure out a way to use those in a secure manner. but that's why like the LastPass, right? Like we've almost created a watering hole of, hey, where are the credentials stored? Where would it be interesting to go after? And we've seen a hack against a password manager and a breach. And what are the implications of that, right? So I just posted that link to LastPass, them talking about, and to be fair to them, like they're actually being very upfront about what's happened and what's been taken. But I wonder if people stop using them, right? Like I wonder what the bottom line is going to be with LastPass after this happens.
Can I be honest? I don't even consider you, and I hate, and this is not because I'm sure I don't know of anybody off the top of my head, but I'm sure like either you or I or both know somebody from LastPass, and so this is not an insult, but I'll be honest, I use OnePass. If I'm going to do anything, like it's going to be with one password, it's not going to be with LastPass, but different design, different architecture. That's why, yeah, that's what I'll say. That having been said, again, yeah, we recommended this to people, right? As security professionals, like, yeah, use a central. And I still do maintain that it's better than the ways people have been managing their passwords previously. So don't get me wrong, still believe that, but it's also a tough call when you're like, hey, corporations and people, you should be managing via Teams and all that stuff. You should manage your credentials that you're sharing or storing, whatever, and then have these things continually happen is a little frustrating. So
yeah. Well, I mean, and I think we see this also in cloud environments, like with the key storage or the password storage, the secrets managers for AWS or whatever else, right? Like they become a target. And yeah, I mean, again, it kind of goes back to what would you recommend that people actually do what they use, and we should be doing that to non-technical people, not just hey, you're building an application, you should be using a storage manager, a password manager for those credentials. But like consumers need to be aware of that too, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
My girl wanted to say hi on the podcast. Apparently, she just hopped up here and hi, Harper. Yeah, she I don't know. She occasionally pops in. Hi, you okay? Yeah, just wanted to say hi. Apparently today. Yeah. So
you're paying attention to something else. Gosh, what the nerve?
I know the nerve. I know something other than her. Yeah.
Well, there was another Twitter thread that we were talking about.
This one I found really interesting because this is actually a conversation that, there's so many cool conversations that you have when you're on the inside of a team that's dealing with package management, which, I used to be it's so long ago, like several weeks ago, I used to work at GitHub. And,
several weeks ago, so long ago.
It's been a fortnight.
So Ken can now talk. Like gloves are off. Let's admit what actually went on there. Like airing dirty
the
laundry.
real stuff. No, no. It's interesting how many of these kind of decisions you have to make. And so the link you're sharing is essentially the issue is that there was a NuGet package. It had 68 vulnerabilities, I think, is what it said. Just been around forever and unmaintained. They don't have any, the owner, non-responsive, couldn't maybe, I think they even thought maybe the owner of that package was deceased. In any case, I'm really not sure what to do with it, but they don't want people down. They, being somebody in the community, didn't want that downloaded. Travis McPeak had a really good response to all of this, and that I can post in here. But essentially what it was where do you draw the line? Because NuGet doesn't own the package, just like NPM, and this is what I have a frame of reference to draw upon was NPM, because I'm in there looking at all the conversations about these exact subjects. It's a hard line to draw. Like I can tell you NPM is would rather cut off their own foot than remove a package, essentially. Like it is a big deal because that line does have to be drawn and it does have to be adhered to. It's a very slippery slope to start removing packages based on opinionated things. Now, what you can do is take alternative approaches. So you can say, we're going to make that package private for a amount of time, and then the owner has to go through these recovery options, or steps to get that back online and make it public and all these things. Remember though that if you remove a package, and even if you think it's garbage and it's unmaintained and it has a bunch of vulnerabilities, that is potentially going to cause breakage in unintended ways for various people's systems. So now you just, by taking an opinionated stance and making some action based off of that opinionated stance, have potentially broken and made a worse outcome, again, potentially for your customers, for your clients, for your users. So it is a very difficult proposition. Now, I would love, and one of the things you'll see is baked into, for instance, NPM, is you do see a health kind of a and I think Sneak does this. You can see a kind of a health score for the package. So you can see like how active is it, has essentially a bunch of different things that come together to kind of coalesce and represent that health statistic. But I like the idea of something like a progressive brownout to blackout based off of those metrics. But I think it maybe what it should be is more of a conscious decision. I guess what I'm saying is you could put that burden on the package distributors. I don't know if that's fair. I think representing that score and then allowing people to make or take action as individual organizations or users makes more sense to me than the actual package ecosystem. The one place I would say I would make an exception there, Seth, is if there are clearly obvious known bad packages, right? Things that are like stealing information, or crypto mining, things like that. That's different. That's where we get back to fraud and back to abuse.
Yeah, actual abuse, right? Well, and like Twitter, will never change, right? Like Travis asked that question about like, well, how many, like, what's the threshold? And of course, somebody responds as like with one, right? Like, oh, if there's one vulnerability, pull the package, right? And I'm like, no, right? Like, if you flip it around, right? Like, I'm building an application, and or I'm maintaining an application. When do you stop using a vulnerable package, right? That would be my question, because most businesses are going to say, if that package is being used and it is generating, money as a part of this product, we're not just going to pull that package, right? Like, that is the risk of using open source. That's the risk of, building using third-party libraries, is there's going to be vulnerabilities in there. And then I would flip it around too, to you as a consumer. Do you stop using a specific service like Chick-fil-A because they were breached, right? Because there was a vulnerability that existed there, and no, you don't, right? Like, that's a very like black and white worldview, but you will be very much just frozen in inaction if you try and take that sort of a stance, because it's shades of gray, right? Like, if I'm using that, that library, that npm package, does it actually affect my system? Are we using the vulnerable portions of that library? And I know like Kenna and those guys were trying to figure out real impacts of vulnerabilities and CVEs in these different places. But it's a hard nut to crack. And as a package, not as a package maintainer, but as a package repository, those questions have got to be like, that line has got to be a super interesting discussion to have. Like you were saying, it was obvious, like malware and fraud, that you would take down those packages. But did you ever have discussions around some of these like vulnerabilities, like those, like, oh, this is obviously something that hasn't been updated for 10 years. You just flagged those packages, or what happened with that?
Yeah, no, if it is something that has vulnerabilities, whatever, better to just represent that information, like with a overall score of, what I'm saying is, it's better to allow people to make decisions about how they're going to manage that risk. If you want to include, because like, man, if you want to include it because you're like, I don't care, whatever, like, okay, it's got 68 vulnerabilities, doesn't matter. Today I need this thing. We can work on that later. Well, like, that's a very opinionated decision for me to be. And again, maybe this is something that is just your personal project. Maybe it's just something for school, whatever, right? I don't know. That's the point, is I don't know all the different use cases out there. I'd rather just give you the information and let you make the decision as an adult on your own and how you want to operate than I would. And this is the part of those discussions. I'm trying not to get too specific, but that's the general gist, is like, give people enough information for them to make those decisions, not necessarily try to be the arbiter of what is good and what is acceptable and how people. Now, who does that? Well, the people that aren't doing open source do that, right? App Store is my number one example to point to. Sure, yeah, no, they 100% have like pretty significant standards you have to adhere to. They also operate though, and like, we could get into the nuances, but it's very easy for them to have this ecosystem that's very tightly controlled using this very specific set of APIs with this kind of code. It's very easy, and it's all money based, and it's part of their larger thing, and it's all really well funded. What people have to remember is, even if, like, say, a GitHub buys NPM, or any even like NuGet with Microsoft, whatever, yeah, those are technically funded, but at the same time, like, how it's a different world entirely when people aren't buying necessarily all of these packages, right? This is open source. It's a different world than a closed ecosystem that it's owned by one vendor, or at least distributed by the one vendor, and you have to pay for everything or whatever. You know what I mean? So anyways, I just think that's, since you asked about like what those conversations look like, that's kind of the high level philosophy behind it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that makes sense, right? Like, because we all do that risk calculation, or, I would hope people are doing that risk calculation at some level, right? When they're installing those packages, when they're using them. Your point about the app stores is well taken, though, because it's you think about some of the free app stores that are out there, and the amount of just like, oh, we're going to allow whatever to be pushed up to it. And you see things like fraud, you see miners, you see, apps that are trying to steal data and do things that they shouldn't do in those environments, as opposed to those that are run by the big players, where they're limiting those APIs. There's limiting access to X, Y, and Z, and they won't push out applications if it contains any of that, that dangerous content. And so there's this fine line that the open source package repositories have to walk, as far as what's allowed, what's not. Very interesting problem. I guess obviously we're not going to solve it, but it is interesting to see it actually called out in that way.
I think there's been a lot of progress from package managers on securing their ecosystems because of all of the high profile attacks and all of the publications about supply chain risk and all of this. So I do think things, for whatever, to put a pretty bow on all of this, I do think things are drastically improving over time. And again, I probably lean towards that philosophical, political, whatever you want to say, like, allow people to do things, even if that stuff is bad for them, and even if that stuff's good for them. Let them be adults, let them make their own choices. But Brian, to make that caveat, though, that Brian Glass had put into Slack, it is a challenge to represent information in a way that gives people. It's hard to represent that information in such a way to be sure that everyone has gotten it and consumed it in a way that will actually help them make those decisions. But again, I think it's better to err on the side of letting people make those choices themselves.
I do. I still love the idea of that nutrition label for software, but it does feel like we're getting there, right? Like you do an NPM install and you get back an NPM audit, right? By default, of what those packages look like, right? And those scores are there, and you start to be more of you start to recognize what's an actual risk. You've got, you're using GitHub, you're getting dependabot alerts when things come out, and you can, tune that to what your risk tolerance is. And so we are pushing that direction. And to be completely fair, I don't know NuGet as well as I know NPM and some of the other, package ecosystems that are out there, because I just have not been a .NET developer for a long time, right? So like it'd be interesting to actually compare those sorts of features and that sort of activity to see what detail and what risk the package ecosystems are giving to each of the projects as they install those packages, right? Whether or not it's we know that there's a risk associated with this package, this is what it is, or my gut feel for things like NuGet is that they just don't do that, right? Like it's not built into the Visual Studio IDE at this point, or maybe it's hidden in the console somewhere. I'd have to do some research to look, but it would be an interesting, if anyone listening wants an interesting research project, that would be one that I would like. I'd be fascinated to see how they compare, right? Because I know like NPM and like the pip guys and everything, like those guys compare notes, right? They definitely kind of work together on some of those open source package managers. But, when you do get into some of those that are more closed source, like NuGet, it'd be interesting to compare and contrast what the feature set looks like.
Sure. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see a breakdown of security features offered by each package management ecosystem, major package management ecosystem.
Yeah. If anybody wants
What's
to do that,
doing? No, I'm joking.
Yeah, exactly. CPAN.
What are they up to these days?
Yeah, exactly. And then where do you stop on that too, right? Like you've got like, Red Hat's package manager, or like operating system package managers, or package ecosystems. And yeah. I don't know, like for how long did that rimraw file package live around in NPM, right? The RM minus RF all package.
Oh yeah.
Years ago. Yeah.
I forgot about that.
I'll have to post a link to that, because that's an entertaining. I mean, it was a security guy, right?
Yeah. No, there's well, was that
it's now in the security holding, right? Like
there have been some nasty things done in these packages, so it's always. Anyways, what else do we have on the docket for today? I feel like there was one other thing that you had brought up.
Audit log of shame. Audit log wall of shame.
So this one I was hoping you could break down, because I didn't get a chance to read it, but when you sent it over, I was like, oh man, like what?
Crocs and socks, baby. Crocs and socks.
Yeah.
Okay, so apparently I'm not the only one concerned about monitoring and logging, right? Shocking. I know. It's definitely the dad topic. So audit logs.
I can post this in general if you'd like, and YouTube.
Oh, I just did.
Oh, okay, cool.
Awesome. Yeah, I just dropped it in both. Okay, so go take a look at this. Right, they're talking about audit logs. All right, so basically, if you scroll down, right, they've got like a grading scale. They've got things in audit logs that they're looking for, but they're going through logs provided by like various cloud providers and grading them based on a number of criteria. So you'll see things like, Notion, right? There's no API collection. You can't even get logs out of Notion, right? Slack, they're higher tier, but for the enterprise grid, they can actually get, you can get everything you want in a log. Stripe fails, right? There's no documentation. It's interesting that they've created a wall of shame based on a list of vendors and just the log items that are coming out of there, right? Like what are some of the items here? Lack of information or attribute activity or to a user or IP address. Yeah.
Man, they're throwing some serious shade on a couple of these, some F's on here.
Yeah, I know. I like fascinating. This one came out of TLDRSec. I hadn't seen it until it popped up in Clint's blog or Clint's newsletter. But it did tickle my, my fancy here, right?
Well, I do like the breakdown in the very beginning of what makes an audit log versus a system log. System log being something used to troubleshoot, whereas an audit log is used to enforce. And I think that's a nice mental delineation of how you can categorize, what
Yeah.
goes into which.
Yeah. And, you get down to the very bottom and it's a, audit log wall of shame is maintained by security engineers, right? That's all it says.
Yep.
Obviously, like whoever Shell Crowmancer is on
Unordered arrays
GitHub.
inside of nested JSON. I mean, that's usually pretty easy to fix yourself, but I get it. It'd be nice if it was just done correctly from the beginning.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It was just,
So
it's fascinating.
random dictionary is
Yeah. Which one are
probably
you
meaning
looking
a
at?
hash inside of an array. So what are some examples of qualities that make a bad log? So like one of them is random dicks, but dictionaries, Jesus
Dictionaries.
Christ. DICTS, which I think is representative of like a hash kind of key value. Damn it, Seth. I'm gonna regret. Anyways, moving along.
We're gonna cut that whole section. I'm gonna make a an explainer video of random dicks. Right. That's.
This is why we shouldn't go longer than an hour. This is how it gets.
Yes.
Anyways, so I guess what I'm saying is like it does make sense because as you're parsing through, like let's say you've parsed through logs, you've got a JSON format, you've got a key, you've just pulled out some the value by the key. The value comes back. It's a mixture of different data structures, unordered array items, whatever it may be, and then you have to do a lot of extra coding in your system, assuming you can do that. You're not just like plugging into something that you can't customize very easily, which I think is rare. But in any case, like let's say you're gonna have to massage that data yourself. That's a lot of extra work. So I get why I actually think that's for me, that's one of the more interesting parts of this, because the other stuff we talk about in our course, so it's not new to me or you, is like not having a user tied to, an IP address and an activity, and just not collecting enough information about the event itself. We've seen not having like timestamps in there, or having incorrect, untrue timestamps that are then like it's difficult to actually figure out the true time things occurred. Inconsistent event type definitions based on anything that you see here that really kind of sticks out for you, Seth, in terms of either bad examples or just like things you've seen with logs that is like kind of a gripe you have.
Yeah, I mean, most of the code that I look at, it ends up being this like lack of separation between the system and audit log. So I'm with you there as far as like, hey, this like, okay, we have something that actually logs what a user is doing, like when they log in, all their activity, as opposed to, hey, we have a system log that is just like indicators of like, it's more of a debug log of what's going on inside the application when there are errors, where that gets written to. And that separation is something that I do not see very often, right? Larger organizations probably do a better job with that. But in general, those tend to be the same thing in most applications when there are any logs whatsoever, right? And we're not just depending on Apache or, Cloudflare or something else to actually log, traffic streams and, interactions with the application. And so I start to dig into the list, right? Like, oh, these are the companies that they're shaming, the applications themselves, and seeing how, like what those actual findings are. Because this is all stuff that, we would want to add to like the secure code review checklist, right? Like what is in those audit logs. Like that's where I kind of go back to. This is why we're updating the course as it is, to account for these sorts of changes and new information as it comes out and what we're actually seeing in the wild. It's one thing to just sit down and have an exercise and think about what you could possibly see in these logs. It's another to actually have this sort of information where someone's done the research and dug into 1Password and Atlassian and AWS to see what's actually going into the logs and where it fails. So,
what's the craziest or like worst or funniest thing you've ever come across with auditing gone wrong?
I think you and I mean, recently this, we just did that assessment where we saw password digest actually show up in the log files, right? I think those are always the most interesting ones where they get exploded, like an object gets passed into a log statement and gets exploded by default, and you end up with things like passwords, the password digest, and reset tokens or whatever else that are in there. And then that combined with the ability to actually see that log through an API interface, like that's super interesting, right?
Yeah,
I
and
don't know.
Brian brings up a good point about how monitoring and logging are two different things too, by the way.
Yeah.
Because the ones, obviously for especially forensic activity important, but from a real-time response perspective, yeah, that's different. That's more monitoring.
Well, and I
Yeah.
want to say too, right? Like my gut on this is that the wall of shame is actually coming from people that are doing monitoring, right? Not necessarily from application security guys that are looking at what's being logged, but the consumers of that log, because they're trying to push this into Splunk or something else and notify on the events that are coming out of that. And what do they find? They find a lack of consistent timestamps. They find, right, like they are the ones dealing with this on a daily basis. So it's not necessarily application security that suffers here. It's our partners in crime that are trying to do incident response, that are trying to do monitoring, that are in the SOC looking for events. And if we miss some of this and we don't have the timings right, like we don't build it into the application properly, then we miss events, right? And that's the worst case scenario when you have a breach going on, that you can't actually recreate that activity.
Yeah, not having that data after the fact or during an event is really, really horrible. I definitely have felt that more than once in my career.
Yep.
Cool.
And at that point too, right, it comes back to you as like an application security person to go in and figure out what they actually did, how they exploited the application, but you can't ever recreate the logs, right?
Hey, Seth.
What? You wearing your Crocs? Sweet.
Don't have any socks on. Sorry to disappoint.
Oh man,
it's a nice day out. There's not super cold.
No socks. I do happen to be wearing like my Birkenstocks instead, and with socks. So there you go. Right? Yeah.
It's not Crocs though. And with are they white socks?
No, they're not. I'll have to fix that.
Neither of us were ready for this audit talk.
No, we were not today. But
we gotta do like a Mr. Rogers where we just like change into different, just put on socks and different. Yeah.
Maybe we'll do that next time auditing comes up. I'll just put on like some socks and put on my Crocs and we'll show them. We can play a nice little like jazz background introduction too, right? Like, hello friends.
Put like one of those casual or cardigan sweaters on.
Yes, there you go. So I was gonna say, right, like we do have some new graphics to go along with Crocs and socks that we haven't necessarily released yet, right? Ken, you've seen those, the different, So eventually we'll have some new stickers to give away that feature Crocs and socks, or new swag that features it. Let me see what else. I don't know. We haven't mentioned sponsoring yet either. We do have a prospectus that should be out. I know I keep saying that. Life gets in the way though for Ken and I. The prospectus will be out soon, and will be on the website. We will tweet out, or we'll drop it on LinkedIn as well. So just watch at the Absolute AppSec space for sponsorship opportunities.
And I like that, Brian. InfoSec Mr. Rogers would be a good compliment to InfoSec Bob Ross.
Bob Ross, yes, it would be.
I agree. Yeah, no, I think well, we've got, like I said, we've got a full. I think at some point we need to just put our schedule of events up on the website. So we keep saying it, but I think those are two things we want to add: is the sponsor PDF that Seth there and created, and then the events thing. So I think we're good.
Yeah,
and then again next month.
Yep.
What is it? April 13th and 14th maybe, or is it 12th and 13th for Colonel Con? So anyways, it's that week. So come see us if you're go into the conference, take our training if you can. But if not, just say hi, please. We love talking to people in person.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Cool. Well, yeah, we've been going for an hour. I know we started a little bit late today, but appreciate the discussion and the interaction as always. Join Slack if you have not done so. And if you want swag, DM Ken or I on Slack, and we will get a physical address and send it to you. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's everything for today. The episode was sponsored by Redpoint Security, redpointsecurity.com for all your application security needs. And yeah, I guess that's everything for today, Ken.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. We'll see everybody online. Thanks.